for recap, last time we talked about not only the neuromuscular junction, but at the end there, I mentioned the tension, right? How it's affected by the initial length of your sarcomere, right? So your sarcomere is kind of like your mini muscle, right? So the extent that this was stretched can show you the starting point of the stretch will influence how much of a contraction. And the basic principle here was the overlap between the myosin head and the actin filament here, right? That's the basic thing you want to remember about that, because the more overlap there is, the more gripping power, let's say, of the myosin head that the actin filament has, and the stronger that initial contraction can be, right? At some point in a fully contracted one, the actin filaments actually start overlapping with each other and you lose that ability to interact, right? So you had an optimal range, basically an optimal length to give that optimal contraction. So that's one thing that's, when we're talking about muscle tension, how it's affected. And then, we talked about the action potential. It was a single motor neuron, right? It was a single axon coming down at the neuromuscular junction. It sent its action potential down the sarcolemma, down those T tubules, released the calcium. And then that was what allowed this cross bridge formation to occur, right? And from this picture, you can't tell, but there was a single muscle motor neuron innervating a muscle fiber, right? So each muscle fiber had a single motor neuron innervating and then a single action potential from that motor neuron. A single excitation event led to this single release of calcium. Okay, once that stopped, the calcium was pumped back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and this was released. The contraction stopped, right? So this is from last time. So a single nerve action potential elicited a single muscle action potential, and all the skeletal muscle fibers, which it forms synapses with, right? Because it's going to be, we'll see, it connects to more than one fiber. Right? But so when you have one action potential from the muscle, which is from one action potential of the nerve, it caused a single cross bridge, right? As long as the calcium was acting, right? Action potentials don't change. There's a single action potential. It's all or none. It's a single one, right? But that's a single muscle fiber and a single contraction. But we know there's more than one level of contraction that we can do, right? The force of the muscle fiber, it varies. Your muscle fiber can produce a varying amount of force, much greater force than a single action potential. Okay, so this is going to get into this frequency of stimulation that we're going to talk about, right? Last time we talked about this aspect of it, the initial length of the sarcomere and the muscle. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the stimulation, the frequency of stimulation, as well as the number of muscle fibers we talked about. And actually, we'll talk about the type of muscle fibers on Thursday. So a single action potential giving rise to a single action muscle potential. And there's going to be the difference between the fiber and the whole muscle. So this brings us into this whole concept of a motor unit. There's going to be a neuron that is in the central nervous system, in the spinal cord here, that's going to send out its axon and innervate a certain number of muscle fibers. Okay, this green one innervates 3. This purple one over here innervates 2. That is, if this one fires, it's going to go and cause this contraction right here. If this one fires, it's going to cause this contraction. There's not, this green one is going to be confined to these 3. Purple one is going to be confined to these 3. So the total tension, the whole muscle is going to be able to produce is going to depend on the number of muscle fibers that are contracting in unison. Okay, so each skeletal muscle fiber This one over here has only a single neuromuscular junction, right? Here's the whole length of it. If this was your sartorius muscle, right, that straps across the front of your leg right there, those could be over 2 feet long in some people. It has a single neuromuscular junction, right? A single neuromuscular junction, just one for each fiber, no matter how long it is. So the axon of this somatic motor neuron in red right here is going to branch off, right, and form neuromuscular junctions with more than one, right? This is just showing a, not too realistic example where the red motor neuron here is innervating 3 fibers, purple one's innervating 2, right? So this is the very concept of our motor unit, right? And the motor unit, the definition of a motor unit, it's a somatic motor neuron, and all these skeletal muscle fibers it stimulates. That's the definition. So in this case, right, the size of this motor unit is 3 fibers per motor neuron. The size of this purple one here is 2 fibers per motor neuron, not more or neuron, by the way. It's a typo. On average, it's much more like 150 fibers per motor neuron. And so the thing is that when this red one goes off and causes this contraction right here, all these 3 are going to contract at once. As soon as this action potential goes down here, releases the acetylcholine, causes that excitation contraction coupling event, this whole muscle is going to contract simultaneously with the other 3, right? That signal is going to go down and reach them all at once. Same thing with the purple one. Okay, they're all going to contract at once. So in this case, it's kind of showing they're spread out a little bit because the individual muscle fibers within a fascicle, right? Remember, this is a fascicle here. These are the individual fibers, are going to be dispersed throughout, kind of even distributed, right? This is going to help to distribute the force. One single motor neuron goes out, branches off, innervates a certain number of muscle fibers within a fascicle. When it sends its action potential down, that spreads out along all these branches and contracts all those muscle fibers. So that's the concept of a motor unit. A single motor neuron controls a certain amount of muscle fibers within a muscle. And of course, the entire muscle will be covered by a pool of motor neurons clustered together somewhere in the spinal cord. So if this was the brachialis muscle, you might have, let's say, 10 motor neurons with an average of 150 fibers if there was 1,500 fibers in the brachialis. All right, so that's the motor unit, and we'll get to the next section.